Thank you for participating on this lovely April 23rd. Rocco Luongo here, business coach, entrepreneur, started and run several businesses. I like working with business owners. My background is technical. But before I talk too much about myself, let's talk a little bit about my illustrious co-host today, Dave McCormack. Talk about running businesses and having the chops. Please, Dave, would you introduce yourself to our group?
Sure. Thanks, Rocco. I'm currently the principal of McCormack Consulting. I got a very difficult staff, but we do the best we can. Prior to that, I was with Dave Muller for 13 years. The last 7 were as president. And before this session started, chatting with Rocco about that period of time, and I recalled that we had sequestration, which is a financial impact, and we had H1N1,
the swine flu, right? Yeah,
health impact. So, all right, maybe you patch those together. Here we are today. Prior to Dave Muller, spent 9 years with CH2M Hill, 7 years with Foster Wheeler, and 13 years with Battelle Pacific Northwest National Lab. So I've got a lot of miles under my feet.
With a very varying group. I mean, a lot of tech and nuclear focus, of course, but with a bunch of different groups there. So before we jump too deep into the material, let's just say hello to everybody. I see some people already chatting in on the chat roll. Good morning to you all. I'm going to write good morning. If you are not familiar with this platform, which I see some of you have already typed in. Okay, good, excellent. So, hey, let's kind of warm up a little bit. Let's get everybody familiar with using that chat roll, because that's where I'd like you folks to, I'm going to pop some polls out there. I'm going to send some handouts there that you can download to help you manage this yourself with your family, your teams, etc., your communities. And also, what do we got there, Neil? Coffee, attaboy, right? We got our coffee going, Neil.
Do I need to go offline for that?
Yeah, no, just careful. Remember, you said you weren't wearing pants, so let's just make sure that. Right, that's the new normal. You don't even have to dress below the line, right? It just keeps everything. The modesty panel is built in now. 10-4, Neil. Could everybody just get used to it? I see a lot of people are typing in. I'm going to put some polls out there and handouts. But where are you watching from this morning? I'll start off. I'm watching from Richland, Washington. Oops, I almost spelled it wrong. Where are we watching from, folks? Type it in. Share where you're from. Arthur at Kennewick. Arthur, good to see you in the virtual space. Arthur's running a new engineering drafting company, working with some big names, folks you probably have heard of. Amazon. He is making quite a splash out here. Let's see, who else have I got? I've got Vince from the chilly East Coast. Aha, we've got some New Hampshire reach in the house. Also, Chris. Awesome. Thanks for calling in today and watching, guys. Appreciate having you out here. Who else do I have in here? We got Diane in the chat roll from Richland. Diane, good to see you as well. And then Neil, Meadow Springs in Richland. Hey, how about that? I'm pretty close to you. I'm actually just a little ways up the road from you in Willowbrook Heights. So cool. I wonder if we get better bandwidth by sharing it that way. I don't think we do. So quick question for you guys. How many of you out there are working with your pets this morning? Who has their dog, cat, or otherwise on their lap, or maybe a kid? Who are you working with this morning? I've got my wife Gretchen on the other side here helping moderate the chat roll. She's not a kid or a pet. She's my sweetheart and helped me put this beautiful deck together. She's laughing at me. She thinks I'm a knucklehead. She's right. Okay, so while you guys are getting used to that, okay, dog close by, attaboy, Chenzo. Let me drop a quick poll out into the chat roll. See how you guys are doing. I'm going to pull this thing in here. Let me get my poll ready. Let's see. Hang on a sec. Where is it? Hang on a second. My system is being a bit of a punk. Oh, here we go. Right there. Pop. There it is. All right. How is your morale, folks? Let's just kind of take a quick test. The reason I'm going to ask that is because it's going to tie into what we're going to talk about in here, is that when we lead in the face of uncertainty, rather than just guessing, right? We're lacking information. We know that. The testing that we have available for this disease is minimal. It isn't pervasive, and the fidelity of it, from what we're understanding here, is also not great. We have got lots of false negatives, lots of false positives, and not enough testing per capita. So by the time you conflate all of those factors, it's easy to understand why people are feeling a lot of fear and resistance to this change. So sort of one of my first bullets that I shared with you in the flyer is that we want to make sure that when we lead in the face of uncertainty, that we're going to assess, diagnose, plan, and execute. So look at this. This group is outstandingly high. We have got all high morale. So that's a great start. Oh, there's another one. So we've got another high morale score. I'm just leave that thing up and running for a while. See, as people jump in, we get some more answers there. So I'm going to jump into the content. So as we all know, the current pandemic, and I've got my deck up on the second screen, so as I turn my head, that's what I'm doing. You can see it's led to a lot of uncertainty, no surprises there, right? But what to do about it, you know? And this is where Dave, he looked at this, he said, hey, how come we don't have a guy on there who's got a question? So here's mine, right? What should we do? You know, what should we do? And so my answer is, you know, take a look at what's in common with all businesses right now, Dave. And we had this conversation last week, didn't we? We sort of assessed. We put a lot of surveys out. We're getting a bunch of responses back, which we're digging into. But what were some of those common factors that all businesses have in common, Dave?
You asking me, Rocco?
Mm-hmm.
You bet. We always have uncertainty. We never, if you're an engineer, yeah, you never have enough information to make a decision. And so we're always needing to deal with uncertainty and call it fear of coming up with the wrong answer. But regardless, we're surrounded by reality. We need to deal with it. We can't simply react. We need to be proactive.
Yes.
And the beauty of a plan is that it's flexible. It gives you something to change. And something that I take great solace in is that if you don't know what the right answer is, you've got the opportunity to pick the mistake you want to make.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'll take one that might be relevant to a lot of businesses today. We need to furlough staff. So is it 4? Is it 3? Is it 6? Well, you don't want to reduce staff twice or every day, every week. So the mistake that I would choose to make would be to go perhaps a little deeper than I think we might really need to, because that's the mistake that I choose to make. And the last thing I'll say on that is, in a totally unique situation like we have today, you shouldn't expect yourself to have the answer. Right. This is a totally unique situation. And we're in the positions we're in because it's our job. Right. We're here for a reason, and nobody expects us to be perfect, just to do our best. And as long as we're transparent in that, then I think we all get through it together.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, Dave. And I love your saying about just pick your mistake. You know, that's ultimately what we have to do. And we can do a much better job picking our mistake, really, and picking the best of the bad options by assessing and diagnosing, planning and executing, having a process for our decision making. And this isn't something that you can only do if you run a big business. My wife and I run our home this way. We have quarterly meetings and we review our budgets. I mean, we have strategies and growth, and you're smiling at me, but it's true, we do. We have a team that's really dependent on us. We've got 3 kids and we have plans and that we want to execute, and we're very intentional in how we spend our money and our time. And before I dig a little bit more into the material, the reason that intention matters so much is because we think about money and time. They're 2 very different things, but we use the same verb for both of them, don't we? We spend both of them. And really that means it's about our priorities, right? What you say you want to do is one thing, but what you actually show up for, what you actually spend your money on, that demonstrates what your priority truly is. And so let's talk a little bit more about change. So I think that this is an interesting one. The theme of this year's team meeting is taking it right to the edge. So I do corporate training, I do corporate retreats, and I roll this out to teams in a really cohesive way, because when you manage and lead, you really do need to get out in front of people. And when you want to lead any kind of group, you need to be able to assess them before you're going to go in and communicate effectively to them. You need to understand something about what's going on with them. And this is particularly timely, taking it right to the edge, because Dave, we were just talking about it. We're in an interesting spot right now, sitting in the Tri-Cities, Washington. We have 3 cities that all intersect around the Columbia, Yakima, and Snake Rivers. We also sit on the intersection of 2 counties, Benton and Franklin County. We're located out in eastern Washington. We have a large federal presence with the Hanford, the Department of Energy, located here. And one of our counties has just decided that they're open for business. They're opening up again. And so it's really an interesting time about taking things right to the edge. What are your thoughts on that, Dave?
Yeah, we're a world of opinions, and opinions can be informed by ideology, sometimes political, and yet I believe in this context, we as individuals, we as leaders need to take that as a data point.
Yes.
And make our own decision. You'd be foolish to turn down available data points. I mean, they're all out there. Collect them up. As Rocco indicated, we analyze, and then we make our informed judgment accordingly. Even so, when the state as a whole decides that certain sectors can open, there may be members of those sectors that say, no, I'm going to hang back and not be first. I'm going to be second. I'm going to be third. Perhaps they're able to.
Right.
I think there's still room for judgment in the process. Although I'm getting the heebie-jeebies looking at this graphic, and that gal up in the upper right corner heading right to the edge.
Yeah.
She's kind of bothering me.
Yeah, and are we going to be more that one? Are we going to be more the other one? We just don't know. And as businesses start opening, we'll start seeing, but again, lacking testing, we're only going to start really seeing as, maybe 2 weeks from today, when the asymptomatic phase goes by and people really start getting sick, or people really don't start getting sick. So we're really treating our population in a way as a big experiment.
Yeah, let me add one more comment, if I can, Rocco. That those of us that belong to an organization that is an organization of individuals.
Yes.
You could be 2, 3, 5, 10, 20, 40. They're all different. They have their own particular fears and biases, communication styles. They hear differently when they're communicated with. We need to take into account the diversity of our population and to understand where they are at as we make those decisions on re-engaging the economy, getting back to work. We may have members of our organizations that aren't ready to do that. How are we going to deal with it?
Yes.
Just as our counties and our state has that diversity, so do our organizations. And so having our finger on that pulse becomes very, very important.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, you hit the nail on the head with that, because what we're doing, and we're part of the Prosperity Council as well. Dave and I are 2 of the 3 leads of that council, where we're working on an initiative to make the Tri-Cities a prosperous, inclusive area. We're really focusing on this vision of 2030 of what we can be. We've got about 300,000 people in our area, and we're seeing good, steady growth. Of course, this current situation is impacting us. But what we want to do is we're gathering data from as many different voices as we can and trying to be a dissemination location for information for folks. So without bias, without political favor, or without trying to exclude certain groups, I believe and we believe that the table gets bigger and rounder the more people we have at it. And I think that that's something that is going to help us all as leaders to understand where our teams really are. So when we assess, we're not just saying what we think is actually happening. We actually have an idea of what's going on. So I'm going to drop my assessment dashboard out into the group so you guys can take a look at it. When I run these assessments with folks, every participant gets a form like this. And the form includes a couple of key areas. It talks about your mission. That person gets to fill in the things that matter most to them, when their days are going bad, when they're not, what the kinds of things they like to do in their lives. And then it takes them through a couple of assessments. I call a cocktail of assessments, which I've found to boost diagnostic ability and helping to root out some of the issues that we can plague businesses, like drama issues is something that I run into all the time. And I'm sure we know who the most dramatic people out in their offices are. Maybe some of you are that person already. But these assessments are extremely helpful, and they're stuff I've curated over the years. I'm going to take you through the details of one of them, one you've probably heard of before, the type indicator assessment. It's often called the Myers-Briggs assessment. And basically what it does is it's based on the work of Carl Jung. He's been around for quite a while, gone for quite a while too, as you can see. And he actually is the pioneer of 3 of the 4 types. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what those 3 categories are when we assess people. It's actually named after the mother-daughter group of Myers and Briggs. They actually are the ones who pioneered sort of that last character in the 4-character code of the Myers-Briggs. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about what that means. But the reason this thing is important is because it gives you tremendous insights into the motivation, the energy, the decision-making preferences, and communication styles of your team. And if you're going to have a successful intervention with them, if you're going to affect the way people behave on a big or small scale, you're going to have to understand their communication preferences. If you want to touch someone's mind, you need to share their language. That's something I learned living overseas in Germany when I became fluent in German. I started dreaming in German and speaking in German after a period of time. And this really hammered home to me, this ability that although we can translate a language, people truly do think in their language. And I started thinking in a different language. So the 4 characteristics that are broken up into the Myers-Briggs type assessment, and I'll show you in a minute what all of them look like, are the first one is your energy preference. And that talks about, do you focus on the inner world or the outer world? And this is called your extroversion or your introversion preference. And a lot of people think introverts just don't like to talk to people, and nothing could be further from the truth. Dave and I have very similar type indicators where I'm more of an extrovert and he's an introvert. We have great conversations all the time. Introverts tend to prefer to speak one-on-one with people and have that deeper conversation, where extroverts tend to gravitate out to groups. And that's not to say Dave isn't great with groups. I mean, he leads the Tri-Cities Local Business Association, and he really does. He runs these businesses on a regular basis. The next indicator in there is your information preference. Do you prefer to focus on basic information, or do you prefer to bring it in and add meaning? That's called your sensing versus your intuition, right? Sensing is when you just count on your senses and take it as data, very much like an engineer you'd expect. But intuiting is where you take that and add additional context. Interestingly, Dave and I, both with technical backgrounds, we're both intuitors in that way. The third characteristic is your decision-making preference. And when we look at all of these together, we can really understand how to assess and engage with our teams. Do you look at logic or consistency first, or do you tend to look at special situations and people? And that's basically between the thinking and the feeling. And I'll tell you, one of the areas where I see people really stumble, and I've seen it myself, I've seen it in businesses, is mistaking an emotional issue for a tactical one, and treating a feeling problem with a thinking solution. And this is where we stumble all the time. If someone has made a feeling-based decision, they're stressed, they're freaked out, there's no amount of data you can share with them to comfort them and change what they're about to do next. So it's a fallacy to think you can fix an emotional problem with a logical solution. And the root of people's preference on how they tend to go starts with this characteristic. And if you take a look at that handout that I sent you, you can see that even in mine, I've got like 70-30 extrovert introvert. There are plenty of times I want to just sit by the fire alone and read a book, right? I also have thinking and feeling preferences. And so you'll see that no one is 100%. This gives you an idea of how people behave in general. And when we get stressed, we get adaptive, and these qualities can shift, especially on your energy gathering one, your first characteristic, your E versus.
Yeah, just real quickly, Rocco, I've lost track of how many times I've gotten in trouble when somebody comes in to vent to me because they're angry, upset, whatever.
Yes.
And right away I try to solve their problem, not why they're there.
Yeah.
And big disconnect. So I'm a thinker, and they were feeling, and it very incompatible in that instant in time.
That's exactly right. And one of the other problems there, and this gets down to how we express our love. And it may seem, well, like, do I show my love at work? Well, it's a sign, isn't it? Like we want to share how we care with our team. If someone comes in who's really upset, we want to help them. We want to try to fix this problem, right? And many of us, especially engineers, we tend to share our love with others and our care with others through acts of service. And so it's very logical for a thinking engineer to try to solve someone who's feeling bad with a logical type service, like, a puzzle. I will fix this puzzle for you. And you have two people meaning very well who just aren't having a good connection. And so does that ring with you at all, Dave?
Absolutely.
The last piece of this is your structure, is the structure of how you deal with the outside world. Do you prefer to have things decided, or do you prefer to leave options open? And this is your sensing and your judging. Now, this isn't judging like you're judgmental. It's like you want to assess a situation, judge it, collapse all the possibilities down into one set, what I'll sometimes call the canned response, meaning, this is happening, I can grab this can, the solution sits in there, open the can, and blah, there's the solution. And so that works with some folks and not with others. So if we take a look at, if you take all four of those types and mix each one of those levels, you can start seeing that there forms this table of 16 different options. I tend to be down in this direction here, somewhere between the ENFJ and the ENTJ. I kind of straddle this line between the mobilizers and the directors. Dave was more, where are you, Dave? You're up here in the INTJ, right?
That's me, I think.
INTJ, right? The visionary strategist, right? And so it almost seems like we're a world away, but the thing, after over 1,000 session hours and numerous training sessions with folks, I can tell you that this table is kind of like the periodic table in that the columns and the rows have some significance to them. And there's nothing sacred about their order. I could just as well take that top row and move it down to the bottom, and you'd see that there are similarities between the ENTJ and the INTJ. We're quite similar in a lot of ways. Visionary strategist, strategic director. So if you take your team and take this table, is what I do. If you start seeing that the dots are spread out all over the place, you can move the columns and rows around as long as they stay relative to each other, right? You can kind of slide the whole panel over and you can show where your team actually gels. I've done this a lot before, and it really does help kind of getting people together. The next thing I want to share in the assessment area here is that your judging, thinking, and your sensing, intuiting tend to work together and form your temperaments. So the people who have SJs tend to be more duty seekers, right? They're motivated by the need to be responsible. The sensing, perceiving folks, those are your action seekers, right? And a lot of those people can be the ones who you can bump heads on that one, where one person wants a real detailed plan. Let's understand what everybody needs to do. And these folks are the ones who are kind of like, plans, deadlines, boy, I love a deadline. I love the sound of it rushing by. They're more of the action seekers. They want to go out there and they want to serve right with action. They're not interested in planning. They just want to get out there, kick the rocks over, and handle it. And oftentimes these two types can bump heads quite a lot, although both types can be very necessary. You've got your intuitive thinking folks, right? That's sort of the spot that I generally sit down into the knowledge seekers. I'm definitely motivated by knowledge and competency. That's the space I like to play in the most. But I also play out in the ideal seeking space with the intuitive feeling area. So this is how we can kind of assess our team. It doesn't take terribly long. I do it online. It can go on any kind of platform you want, mobile, your regular computer, tab, whatever. And it doesn't take long. People can do it right there. And then I have a back end that processes all of these things. And we get a manager dash so we can plan our strategy for rolling out interventions depending on what's happening with your team. If you just want to do like a new kind of training, how can we best tailor it to meet their needs? Or if we want to have a meeting where we're going to say, hey, look, we're kind of freaked out right now. Let's get ourselves together, which I hope you're already doing with your teams. If not, I can help you pull that together as well. The other thing that's important to remember here is to think of those indicators as a zip code. It's not your exact address. It gives you a rough idea of where you sit in the spectrum. You're going to find people who are going to look at it and say, yeah, this doesn't apply to me so much, and maybe this does. So plus, how you take it on a given day can also affect. So it helps you zero in on the center of gravity of the people that you're with. So how do you diagnose, right? Assess your team's mission, their personality, their reactions to stress and drama. That's more information than you can get from a Parker team survey or a Myers-Briggs or a DISC, right? This is the cocktail that I found that resonates with people in a business area when it talks about motivation. So that's why I like my model. All of the groups out there who create those assessments, they're vested in you using their system and only their system ultimately. And I look at them like an engineer. It's a tool, and I pick the right tool for the job. Any thoughts on that one, Dave?
I've done this twice, at once at Dade Muller, once at CH2M Hill, the analysis of a team.
Yes.
And how that the team members interact with each other. And having completed those evaluations, it was night and day. It was a dramatic improvement in how the team worked together as a team. Giving each other space to be who they are, and finding a way to meet the needs of each other in communicating,
right,
and operating. Yeah, it was a big benefit.
And I've seen a ton of that value too. And the other piece here, talk about diagnosing and remedying. This kind of gets back to including the ones that we cause ourselves. This really helps us to understand, where we're coming from and maybe the areas where we're missing. Speaking of assessing, how greatly would access to C19 testing affect your business? I'm going to drop this poll right down out into the group right now. Is your business, your home, whatever's relevant for you. I just want to take a quick temperature check on the group, see how things are going. Okay, I'm getting the first answers are coming in already. We're seeing high, big differences. Again, all high. Okay, yeah, it's not surprising, right? I think, okay, 100% high. Right. I think that if we had some better testing, this would help us a whole lot. And I think that, if we had a feeling for how widely spread this stuff was, we as business owners and communities would be able to react. That is similar to being able to test and assess your team so that you can truly diagnose an appropriate response to what to do. Okay, so now that you've got an idea of what's going on with your team, you've assessed it, you've diagnosed it, you've made a plan, how do you roll that remedy out? Okay, so again, planning. When you roll this out to your team, you need to start with the heart and then work into the technical. If you want them to share, you need to share first. Okay, you need to get vulnerable if you're going to be with your team. You know what? You actually need to get vulnerable-er. And Dave, don't look it up. That isn't a word. Or maybe it is. It seems like a silly one though, doesn't it? But you really need to. And one group that I worked with, a guy stood up, he was a consultant, he'd worked with a lot of folks, he raised his hand and said, hey, I have trouble sometimes getting people to be vulnerable and authentic. He says, I feel like they're just closed off, they're not sharing. And we said, okay, well, what about you? What do you share in there? And he said, oh, well, I try to be very, very professional in these things. I don't want to make it about me. And so I tend to share really very little. And so, we applauded him, we thanked him for his honesty and his candor, and we saluted him for being the professional and towing the line, but at the same time had to illustrate that you've missed the point. If you're going to lead a team and you want them to be honest about their communication, their dreams, their mission, the things that they do in their lives, you need to share first, which is why I put my assessment out there right now. And that's what I do to my groups. I don't just sit back and say, okay, let's all talk about you, right? How am I in here? So if I want my team to share this much, I need to share this much. Okay, not this much. I mean, you don't want to overshare. You don't want to vomit your whole life story all over them if it's not appropriate, right? You want to share what's meaningful, but you need to share things that are meaningful, things that are important to you. So if you want to lead a group into a space like this and really get that connection going, you need to share first. And that's what leaders do, right? Leaders have to charge down the guns. We have to go into the uncertainty first. And this can be some of the scariest space for leaders to step into. Any thoughts on that? That last piece, right? No one is going to care what you know until they know you care. Okay. Dave, what are your thoughts on that one? And also on the chat roll, please chime in with any thoughts you have.
Yeah, this one, this actually hits home for me. Participated in the past in a 360 analysis, and you know, that's all of this with the dimension of getting feedback from my superiors, my peers, my direct reports to get their take on me. And lo and behold, you know, it was all good. It was just all good.
Naturally.
But I was found to be untrustworthy, and that was quite a slap in the face for me, because that's not my take on me. And it turns out it's because I don't typically tell people how I feel. You know, I don't share from a feelings perspective. I don't reveal much. You know, I keep it professional. Here we are at work, and let's just deal with the facts. So I wasn't expressing the fact that I cared or what I cared about sufficiently to be vulnerable to them, so that they could open up and be vulnerable to me. So was shocked to hear it, glad to know it, and I acted on it, and you know, the experience was better. We became more effective and open with each other as a result of it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Dave, and I salute you. Thank you for sharing that, right? That is not something that people are going to want to step up and say. And I can tell you from when I work with you, Dave, I know that you are extremely honest, right? You're extremely trustworthy. I trust you explicitly. I think that you are a great leader, but I can certainly understand how that assessment would come back, right? The Management 360 is one that I have and use as well, and I do think it has great diagnostic capability. If you guys haven't ever heard of that one, this is where you send out an assessment to your team, and they essentially give you a report card. My wife and I have done a similar version to our kids, sort of a mini parenting 360. That's how into this we are. How are we doing as parents? You know, we want to check and see. You know, I appreciate you sharing that, Dave, and thank you, Vince, for chiming in. That does resonate. That resonates with me too. And part of the reason why we want to share how we feel, real simply, and if you haven't ever read The 1 Minute Manager by Ken Blanchard, the key to encouraging people and also redirecting them when they're off track lies in sharing the facts about what's happening and then sharing how you feel about it, right? Because people make decisions based on their emotions, and we justify those decisions based on our thoughts. And so let's say that one more time, because it's really important. The root of motivation that makes someone take an action is always emotional, and that happens fast, right? Thank you, Arthur. Yes, and that happens fast. But the thoughts are what justify it. So please remember, you need to lead with your feelings, especially when you're working with your teams. It doesn't have to get gushy, but you should share. Hey, you were great yesterday. You really knocked it out of the park. It makes me feel so secure and proud when I see my team members growing and producing at such high quality. That wasn't overly emotional, but it showed that I felt great, because it lets them see that their actions affect how I feel in a positive way. When you take a look at what people want out of their careers and their lives, sure, people want to make money, absolutely, but that's usually the third biggest priority. People want recognition, and they want like affirmation that they're doing a good job, right? Those are both deeply emotional. 1 Minute Manager. Thank you, Gretchen. So bring your team together. Okay, that's the next stage of the rollout. Once you've assessed them, once you know what you're going to share, bring your team together, make it collaborative. Teamwork from a half day to multi-day with fun built in. Fun is important because remember, especially now that we're remote, doing webinars and things like that, personality type, and then there's accommodation that we make to expand who we are and effective we can be. Thank you, Neil. That's definitely right. The personality type, remember, is only one part. I couldn't agree with you more, Neil. That is one single piece of the bigger puzzle. Because let me jump back to what I was saying. Team workshops from a half a day to multi-day with fun built in. Think edutainment. We need to be able to entertain people with stories. That's why we kind of open with a talk. That's why we open with our stories and examples, so that you can see it in context as well. And there's no reason why you can't make it more so. I mean, we build games into these things. We build walks into it. I do mountain bike rides with people where we go out and get really just energetic and come back and then have a talk. Your brain is so open after you're high on the endorphins of good exercise. I mean, obviously tailor it to your group, but make it fun, make it engaging, and you'll see that the retention jumps up dramatically. Webinar and online forums, especially now, are cool. Using something like Adobe Connect that allows you to have participant engagement dramatically helps, right? So in a webinar, I can't dump you guys off into mini groups and work, but in a platform like Adobe Connect, when we're really training a group, we can. So I can take people and put them in a virtual space, have a separate moderator running that group, and then let them train back. That way I can do the teach, do, show model. Basically, I teach them something, I let them do an exercise, and then they come and teach it back. It's an excellent way of boosting retention in people's minds, right? If you just listen to someone, 2 weeks later, you remember about 10% of what they've said. If you do a presentation afterwards, you remember about 80% of what you've said after 2 weeks. Get your team engaged, make them do something together to crystallize that learning. So understanding your team's communication preferences, especially under stress, will give you the ability to communicate very authentically, because you're going to understand the things at and below the surface, right? These assessments that I put together can introspect deeply into people, right? I ask some questions in different sections that reinforce each other, and by using some math trickery, I'm a big old nerd, I can tell how these questions interact with each other to yield a second level of deeper understanding, where people are really enthusiastic or where they're not. And another piece that we're working on, I think my next webinar in a couple of weeks out, I want to talk more about this, is doing some sentiment analysis. So when you take a look at the numbers, hey, how's your morale? 5. Okay, great. Everybody's really happy. 5 out of 5. That's awesome. But if you also add long form responses, tell me what you're struggling with. Oh, I'm struggling with blah, blah, blah. They write it out. If you take all of that information and roll it into an AI bot that can do what's called a sentiment analysis, beyond just seeing like a word cloud pop out, it can tell you how people are feeling in general based on the words that they're writing. This is a very powerful tool. And we're going to be using that on some of the survey responses that we're getting from our community. We've got about 1,000 responses in so far. And so we're really going to take a look at not just what people are saying, the content of their talk, but how they're saying it, the sentiment lying behind the words. And this level of diagnostics is something that we can bring to bear on your businesses as well. So how to evaluate change resistance? I shared with you in the webinar that it largely in the webinar flyer, that it largely comes down to 2 factors why people are resistant to change, okay? And it really comes down to this. It comes down to what's at stake versus your choice. And I do love a 4-quadrant analysis. They're one of my favorites. So if you take a look at, if you have little at stake and your choice, and this change is your choice, right? You're not going to be terribly resistant to that change in general, okay? Again, this is more of a zip code. So within that low box, there's going to be variations. Like I tend to be pretty happy with change. I'm not so resistant to change. My wife tends to be more resistant to change. I'm not putting you on the spot. It's just the way it is. I love you. She's not throwing anything at me yet. If you have lots at stake and this change was imposed upon you, like the COVID situation that's going on right now, it's not terribly surprising that people are highly resistant to change. And there's an old Zen maxim that says, our suffering is equal to the pain that we're experiencing times our resistance. So if you take a look at the pain that you're dealing with, and for all of us, it's different. Some people have lost their jobs. Their actual pain is higher at this point. Others hadn't, so maybe it's low. But whatever that actual real world pain is, multiply it by how hard you're resisting is the resulting suffering that you're feeling at this time. And if your resistance is high, which is not unreasonable to expect that it would be, it's pretty high. It's pretty easy to assume that you might be suffering quite a lot right now, or your team is too. So bear this in mind when you're communicating with them and try to assess, right? It's all imposed, especially if you've laid your team off, right? If you had to furlough your team, that's imposed on them. They didn't choose that. And probably lots is at stake. So your interventions to try to bring them back or help them is going to be met with a lot of resistance. So you need to be able to use the tools that we're talking about to effectively communicate with these people. So how do we create a framework to assess and address? Okay. When people are resistant, they're probably thinking of a lot of different fears. And when we're lacking information, fear comes in and fills the gaps. That's what ends up happening. Before I jump in too much deeper on this one, Dave, I've kind of shared a lot. What are your thoughts on what I've shared? And what are your thoughts on where people sit relative to fear right now?
Great questions. So there much of this is good to do, to have under your belt during the good times. In the midst of crisis, hey guys, let's figure out who we are and how we communicate. Better to have done that in advance. Given that we're in the midst of crisis, knowing that these factors are in play, perhaps you don't have all the tools and understanding already in hand to deal with it, but forewarned is forearmed. All right, I know I've got these issues. We need to act now. We need to plan this week. We need to communicate with staff tomorrow. I mean, reality is reality. You've got to do what you've got to do. But as I say, forewarned is forearmed. You know what's going on. You just don't yet know how to deal with it.
Right.
Never too late. Let's do this next. But the framework is critically important, and something that has worked well for me in the past is the old axiom: divide and conquer. Get a person, get a team working on problem A, a person and a team working on problem B, and then you tackle this one as the leader of your organization. Just because you've got multiple things going on doesn't mean you can only do one thing at a time. Divide and conquer. But I think you're right on, Rocco, with regard to getting the framework stood up to assess and address what's going on. I think that the fear that people have right now is twofold. When are the restrictions going to end, and what's going to happen when they do?
Yeah, that's right. And Vince, I see you out there. Is this what business continuity models are based on? I think that those are they're supposed to be specific to your business and your niche, but ultimately any kind of business continuity is going to be based on a measurable and a repeatable process, Vince. So you're going to need to assess, you're going to need to plan and execute. And Dave, I said, what you said is right. I mean, dividing and conquering is awesome because not only does it give you multiple paths, so you're trying different things at once, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, but you're also mobilizing people, because one thing that does help is action helps to dispel stress. We definitely get more anxious and stressed out when we're just sitting stagnant. When we move and take action, we tend to feel better. We're doing something, we're reporting back, we're interacting, we're planning the next steps. It gives us a sense of purpose and allows us to sort of work together. Hang on a second, Diane. I found providing plans and protocols office help reduce some of this fear. They appreciate knowing they have options. Yes, love it, Diane. Thank you. Options are fantastic. People love options. It gets people out of the space of, if I'm going to help, more into how I can possibly help by picking an option that's best for them and helping them co-develop what those outcomes are. That's just good leading and facilitating. We take a look at addressing fears. This is another aspect that I think is quite helpful. I'm going to drop another handout out into the group so you can take a look at this one. You can use it with your own teams, your own family, yourself. How you actually diagram your fears and get out ahead of them is extremely helpful. Basically, I've built a framework in that form that I just dropped out there, okay? You start off by asking, what if blank happens? Okay, think about it in terms of the worst possible thing that could happen and go through it list for list, right? There's, I think, 10 or 12 blocks on there. If you have more, print a second sheet out. Then what you want to do is think about the value of a partial solution, because what we're trying to do is dispel the all or nothing model, right? That all or nothing model is a stress reaction. Nothing I do can help. Everyone out there is doing better than I am. Anytime you hear those 100% or zero, those all or nothing type situations, I ask you please to go after and challenge that assumption immediately. Challenge that assumption and then ask what's keeping you from being successful. So the first part here asks you to think of the value of a partial solution. That helps break the all or nothing assumption. The next one is to make it some kind of an action that they can take. It helps empower them, because that helps get them over the barriers that would keep them from moving forward. And so if you break down those actions into things that could reduce the likelihood of this fear from happening and also the severity of it happening, now you start having a wealth of options where before you only had black and white. So one quick example, right? What is one fear that people might be feeling right now? Well, my business is going to close. Obviously, that's a very obvious one. What's the value of a partial solution? Well, businesses could remain open with limited service. That could mean businesses like mine pivoting to online. That could mean businesses opening in a staged way, where we have certain businesses opening and others not. What are the actions that could reduce the likelihood of having your business shut down due to a lack of money? Well, you could reduce expenses. You could access lines of credit. What are actions that could reduce the impact? Well, you could establish distancing and renewed cleaning schedules, which is like what we did at our co-working space, Fuse, located in Richland. You can also limit the number of people that are there at a single time. And so how you exactly do all those things can be a bunch of steps, right? Like at Target around here, right? They're spraying down every handle. Yes, achievers through partial solutions. Yes, exactly, Neil. Thank you very much for that. It allows people to get busy working towards a solution instead of sitting inert and that's just fertile ground for worry to continue to grow. So what to do to stay ahead of fear? Before I jump to that one, what are any questions or thoughts from the panelists? Dave, please chime in with anything. And the chat roll is open. Please shoot some questions our way. Dave, what are your thoughts on that?
Information. Yeah. From my perspective, if you feel like you're over communicating, then you might be communicating almost enough. In silence, people create their own dialogue. And so partial solutions, opportunities to engage, status reports, all keep the void filled with constructive, proactive content, because sidebar discussions, break room discussions will float up outside of your control. So providing that positive information and opportunities to act and to understand are critical to stay ahead of the fear that rumors can create. Yes. Speculation.
Yes. And another piece we talked about too is using that worksheet that I provided. That helps you start writing it down, start creating a list, right? To me, fears multiply when they're out in the cloud out here swarming around your head. They bump into each other and you might hear the same one 3 times and it feels like it's a new one every time. So you have this innumerable list of fears and worries. But once you start capturing them in a list and make them concrete, that cloud starts going away. It starts really solidifying. Right. What are your thoughts on that one, Dave?
Well, I'm a list maker.
Yeah.
And there was an earlier element in our discussion this morning that had to do with the uncertainty and how engineers, just to profile, deal with it. If I've got things going on, change happening, some of it undefined, it's always been very powerful for me to capture it on a piece of paper or in a spreadsheet and to organize it, sequence it. It just feels more manageable if I've got it down on paper. Obviously, if it's down on paper, then I can add to it, I can characterize it, I can work with it as opposed to a bunch of invisible next steps or next events that are floating in air. Get it down on a list, and then more things are possible. And it's shareable that way too.
Exactly right. That plan becomes a communication tool, doesn't it? You start sharing your intention with the team. And if you do that in a group setting, then it's something that they built themselves. They can see themselves in it. You know, one tip I learned from a motorcycle salesman a long time ago is that all good motorcycle salesmen will have the mirrors twisted in so that when you sit down, you see yourself in the mirror as soon as you sit down, right? Let your team see themselves in the plan that you're managing. So for our leaders, this is something from my crisis playbook, and being authentic, keeping your cup full. These are all important. My crisis playbook is out there. You can check it out on my website as well. But this is important. This is not the time to skimp on self-care because you cannot pour from an empty cup. If your cup is empty, you are not going to be able to authentically lead your team. So if you can have an idea of how your team is doing, how you're doing, you can capture all those feelings and bring them down so that they become real. Now, all of a sudden, you are more confident and calm. That fills part of your cup, and you will be able to lead more effectively. And that energy becomes infectious throughout your team. You're going to get knock-on effects where your team is getting more confident and comfortable. Are they going to think everything's rosy? Heck no, things aren't rosy. But seeing clear, authentic, and consistent communication from your team to your team, demonstrates strong leadership, and that will resonate with a sense of confidence and calmness in your team. So I want to jump into this bit right now. This is another key aspect to being able to deal with stress and uncertainty is whether you have a growth or a fixed mindset. In basic, right, your growth mindset means that failure is an opportunity to grow. In a fixed mindset, it means that failure is a limit of my abilities. And let's just take through a couple more characteristics of these two different mindsets. In a growth mindset, I can learn to do anything I want. In a fixed mindset, I'm either good at it or I'm not. See, this is that all or nothing mentality again. In a growth mindset, challenges help me grow. In fixed, I don't like to be challenged. My efforts and attitude determine my abilities. Well, that's right? My attitude determines my altitude. Like how high can I go is really determined by my own attitude. Whereas if in a fixed mindset, my abilities are unchanging. This is what I got. I was born this way, and that's it. Feedback is constructive. This is a way that I can learn and grow. Another way, feedback and criticism are personal. Oh man, that assessment didn't go very well. I suck. Right? I'm inspired by the success of others. Right? When I'm frustrated, I give up. The fixed mindset folks also tend to like to extinguish someone else's candle because they feel like that makes theirs less bright. That isn't the way it works, right? You're not going to make your light shine any brighter by extinguishing someone else's, right? You want to help boost people up. Okay? The growth mindset, I like to try new things. In the fixed mindset, I stick to what I know. I think you can probably see how that fixed mindset can definitely lead to change resistance. So what to do in your organization to stay ahead of fear, right? Assess rather than guess. There's already enough confusion out there. Let's not add to it. Okay, plan the work the plan, follow a process so that your team can see the framework and they get less resistant to what's happening when they see a good frame, because then they can put themselves in the frame, what's meaningful to them, and start creating their own path within a framework that's functional for you, right? Don't ever give your team options and things out there, right? A framework that isn't going to be good for your business or the situation. Help build it together with them so that people can see how they're relevant and how it works together for them. Have a growth versus a fixed mindset, right? Try to encourage those qualities, okay? Also, the 80-20 rule really applies. Get the plan done and then move. Don't try to get it 100%. Don't get paralyzed by trying to get to that nth degree of perfection. Perfection doesn't exist. That's getting back into the all or nothing mentality, which is where we do not want to be. We want to get back into the world of possibilities. And if you leave some room open for opportunity to come in, you'll see that a lot of that opportunity ends up being better than you expected, especially when people are working in their own zones of genius and you're leading rather than trying to, squeeze people down. And keep your cup full, right? This isn't the time to skimp on your own self-care. So A couple of parting thoughts for us, and I'll open the floor for some questions. Change is coming for all of us. Logically, there's no other option. So logically speaking, your choices are simple. Get busy working towards the change you want, or get used to the change you have. And this kind of gets back to choosing your mistake. There is no perfect solution, but if you're vulnerable and honest and authentic and trying your best, your team is going to be so happy that the actions you're doing are helping move you guys all forward. They're not going to be overly critical if you're not overly critical to them, right? If you've been a rough manager and you're really good at criticizing and whipping people, you probably have some comeuppance coming. And so you'd probably better spend some apologizing time saying, oh man, I made some mistakes over there. Here's what we need to do now. Air those grievances and understand what people are doing. If you're already used to leading with your heart and being open, here's a great time to make positive traction. And I can help in both of those ways. Anytime we choose change, we owe it to ourselves first to choose, what do I want this change to be? Now, start with the end in mind and work your way backwards, realizing that those steps may be quite uncertain along the way. So next steps. Use the PDF with your team that I dropped out there. And let me just double check and see if there's any others I wanted to share with you. I think I got the bulk of them out there. Yep. Yeah. Oh, let me share this one with you now. I put this one out in my last webinar as well. This is the block and tackle sheet. This is an optimal weekly planner. If you can't manage yourself and your own time, you're going to have a very difficult time managing your team and getting them to stay on task as well. This is a 2-pager. I use this on a weekly basis. It helps me keep myself planned, helps keep myself going. Grab this thing up. It's a really nice way to use it. You assess yourself on your energy, your nutrition, your sleep. Journal a little bit about the successes you've had last week and how you're going to keep that energy going. Make a list of the people you need to get in touch with and who you need to follow up with. And break your actions for the week up along some broad goals and put them down into blocks in your actual calendar so that you're making time to get things done. And see how you did the next week. Let me know how that goes for you. I'd love to know. I use this tool a lot and I like to share it with my clients. So use those tools. The other thing you can do, if you want to talk more deeply about your situation, you can connect with me. We'll do it in a private setting, nothing like this, no Zoom, right? In a confidential setting where you can take a look, where we can take a look and assess where you're at. I will go ahead and drop that offer sheet here as well. Okay, there's a link in there where you can take a secure assessment. It only takes a few minutes. Fill it out. It'll take you to a link where you can schedule a time with me, and you and I can have a talk, assess where you're at, and help you get a better idea of what's coming up next. No charge or commitment for that. This is my outreach to you. The sessions can take as little as 30 minutes, but we can take longer if you need. The time is not running as far as I'm concerned. We'll take as long as it takes to get to what really matters. You can follow the link in the offer sheet I just sent out. That can really help you move forward in that. That's what the sheet looks like. That's the link you can click to get into it. And thank you for your time, folks. I appreciate you being out here. Any questions or comments, any parting thoughts before we get back to our day with a little bit more certainty and understanding of what's coming next? Dave, any parting thoughts?
This is all solid gold. Just based on my experience, the biggest vulnerabilities, the biggest gains that we have come through people. Now, you might come up with some great intellectual property that will solve world hunger. All right, that's a big gain too. Yeah. But in the normal world, where I think most of us live, the biggest improvements, the biggest positives for all of us come through people and the interaction with people. So I'm sold. I believe that this is the route to success and getting through the current problems that we're all facing.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks very much, everybody, for participating. Appreciate you. Get out there, act with intention, get ahead of this stuff. Let me know what I can do to help. I'm going to continue to send emails out. I read every one of them. Thank you to those of you who respond. Hey, and I'm going to end this. I'll send the replay out to everybody. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate you. And yeah, stay well, stay ahead, steady on, my friends. Thank you.